All right, so today we're diving into something I think is on everyone's mind, especially these days. We're talking about getting smarter with our money. But we're not just going to, throw out stock tips or anything. We're going deeper, looking at the bigger picture of like financial health and all those market forces that kind of like impact all of us, whether we realize it or not.
Right.
So our guide for this deep dive is the February 19th edition of the Nutstuff newsletter. It's by this financial analyst, William Nutting. Have you heard of him?
Oh yeah, netting's pretty well known, yeah.
Yeah. Nutstuff, it's like a mix of investment advice, global commentary, and some, well, let's just say colorful opinions sometimes.
Yeah, definitely colorful.
So, okay, before we get to all that, like the global stuff, let's start with something I think we can all control, right? Our own personal money moves. Now, Nutstuff doesn't really like give you a step-by-step budget plan or anything,
No.
but there's definitely a philosophy there.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
What's your take on that?
Well, what's fascinating to me is the way nutting emphasizes, constantly emphasizes the need to really distinguish between needs and wants.
Oh, okay.
It's not just about, cutting back on like your daily latte or something. It's really about understanding what actually drives your spending and then making sure that, your spending aligns with your values.
So it's more than just saying no to that latte. It's about asking yourself, is this purchase really like improving my life in a way that's meaningful to me?
Exactly. It's more about being mindful, not depriving yourself.
Right.
And this actually ties into his investment philosophy as well.
Okay.
Nutting really advocates for like investing in companies that cater to those essential needs, even if they're not like the most exciting or flashy picks.
Interesting. So like give us an example. What kind of companies are we talking about here?
Well, he's quite bullish on healthcare, for instance. He specifically mentions him as stock. It's a telehealth company.
Okay.
And then there's like basic transportation like Uber, for example.
Uh-huh.
He sees a lot of long-term value in those sectors because they're meeting fundamental human needs.
So like transportation and being healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for our listeners, this could mean taking a closer look at your own portfolio.
Yeah.
Asking yourself, am I invested in companies that, do they align with my values and do they have the potential for that sustainable growth? Something to think about. Now, Nutstuff also takes some, pretty strong positions on what's driving the markets right now.
Yeah, he does.
Like it can be a bit of a wild ride sometimes.
Definitely.
But let's try to, understand his logic here. He's very critical of the net zero push, this global effort to drastically reduce those carbon emissions.
Mm-hmm.
He argues it's just not realistic economically and that it's really more politically driven. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, if we connect this back to the bigger picture, I think his skepticism really stems from what he sees as like a disconnect between how ambitious these goals are and the actual practical realities of, producing energy.
Yeah, okay.
He uses the UK's energy policy as an example.
Right. He claims, their policies have actually driven up costs for people while failing to make them, energy independent, right?
Exactly. And he gets really specific with his critique, too.
Oh, does he?
Yeah, he even mentions this statement by Ed Miliband. I don't know if you remember him. He was the former leader of the UK Labour Party.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And he was a big advocate for renewable energy.
Uh-huh.
But Nutting offers a pretty scathing rebuttal.
Wow.
He accuses Miliband of, being out of touch with what the UK actually needs in terms of energy.
So is he saying, like, all renewable energy is bad?
Not necessarily, no. I think he's more concerned with what he sees as, like, hypocrisy,
Uh-huh.
and poor planning, especially in the case of the UK.
Okay.
He seems skeptical of, how fast this whole transition to renewable energy is happening.
Yeah.
And who's actually benefiting from it.
Interesting. So it's not like a black and white issue for him?
Yeah, it seems that way, right?
Yeah.
He's really urging people to, like, think critically about all the complexities of this whole energy landscape.
And this brings us to, I think, his bigger point, right, about the forces that are really shaping the markets beyond just energy trends.
Yeah, I think that's right.
What's he saying?
He believes that geopolitics are the real driver.
Okay.
Specifically, the relationship between the U.S. and Russia. That's what he's focused on.
Okay, so let's unpack that in the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore his take on this whole U.S.-Russia relationship and why he thinks understanding those dynamics is, like, key to successful investment.
Yeah, so picking up where we left off, Nutting, he really believes that geopolitics are kind of the real driving force behind what's happening in the markets right now.
Okay.
He thinks that to be successful at investing, You got to understand those global dynamics.
And he's really focused on the relationship between the U.S. and Russia, right?
Yeah, definitely. In fact, he makes this pretty bold prediction.
Oh,
Yeah, he thinks we're going to see like a rapprochement between the US and Russia,
okay.
and he thinks that'll have a pretty significant impact on investors.
Okay, so he's bullish on this idea.
Yeah, very bullish. He goes so far as to like outline a potential scenario for how it might unfold.
Interesting.
But we do need to remember that this newsletter, he wrote it well before, we're recording this.
Right, right.
And some of his predictions haven't quite played out the way he thought. Like for example, he was anticipating Trump returning to the presidency.
Right, yeah, so we need to take that into account.
Yeah, definitely. But his core argument, it still revolved around this idea that the war in Ukraine, it's essentially a proxy war that was, instigated by the U.S.
Okay.
And he thinks that any resolution to that conflict, it's going to involve lifting sanctions on Russia.
And that's where he sees these like huge investment opportunities opening up.
Exactly, yeah. He lays out this whole scenario based on this purported meeting between Trump and Putin,
Okay.
leading to a ceasefire, a neutral Ukraine, and then like American companies all rushing back in to do business in Russia.
So he's picturing like this big rush.
Yeah, like a gold rush almost.
Wow. He even suggests that that they could see a massive boost from their stake in Rosneft, right?
Right, the Russian oil giant. Yeah, if those sanctions are lifted, he thinks that could be huge for BP.
It's a contrarian view, to say the least.
Yeah, definitely. He's really betting against the prevailing narrative.
So how do we, as listeners, how do we apply this kind of thinking, even if we're not like ready to go all in on Nutting's predictions?
I think it's about challenging your assumptions
Okay.
and looking for those opportunities that are maybe underappreciated. And Nutstuff, it's full of these. Some are more speculative than others, of course.
Give us an example. Like, what's he pointing to?
Well, he's very bullish on gold as a hedge against inflation.
Hmm.
He believes that inflation is basically the inevitable outcome of these current global debt levels that we have.
And that gold will hold its value?
Exactly.
That's a pretty, classic hedge.
It is, yeah, and it aligns with his general skepticism of government intervention in markets.
Okay.
He sees gold as a safe haven when times are uncertain.
Makes sense. What else does he see as like potentially overlooked?
He points to the Middle East,
Okay.
particularly the Gulf states.
Uh-huh.
He thinks they have high growth potential.
Yeah.
But they're often overlooked by investors who are just too focused on like the US or China.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and he even suggests a specific ETF to play that, to invest in that.
Oh, which one?
XGLF.
XGLF. Okay. Now let's talk about Tesla.
Okay.
He's still a believer in the company, right? Even with all the Elon Musk drama.
Absolutely, yeah. Though his reasoning might surprise you.
How so?
He's less interested in like their car business these days.
Really?
Yeah, he's more focused on their other ventures, like Starlink, their satellite internet service,
Yeah.
and the potential of X, their digital payment platform.
So he's tying it into his like larger interest in technological disruption.
Exactly. He's always looking for like the next big thing.
So even within a company that he already likes, he's looking for those less obvious angles.
Precisely.
All right, before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, let's pause for a second and kind of recap what we've learned so far. So Nutting emphasizes the importance of needs versus wants, right?
Mm-hmm.
Both in our spending and our investing decisions.
Yeah.
He urges us to consider, those contrarian investments like gold and to look for opportunities in regions that kind of overlooked, like the Middle East.
Yeah.
He also believes that those geopolitical shifts, particularly the relationship between the U.S. and Russia, they're going to have a major impact on markets.
Definitely.
What stands out to you so far?
I think for me, it's that reminder to really think critically and independently.
Yeah.
Don't just accept what you read in the headlines or the conventional wisdom.
Yeah.
Question everything, do your own research, and form your own informed opinions.
Absolutely. Stay curious, folks. Up next, we'll explore some of Nutting's, more, let's just say, colorful opinions.
Yeah.
And try to extract some actionable insights from those. Stay tuned. Okay, so we're back. And sometimes Nutting kind of goes beyond just finance, right?
Yeah, he definitely doesn't shy away from expressing his opinions, even on, controversial topics.
Exactly. And while we, might not agree with everything he says, it's still interesting to kind of see where he's coming from.
Absolutely.
Like, for example, he has some pretty strong views on the UK's military capabilities.
Oh, yeah.
What's he saying there?
Well, he's pretty critical of what he sees as like a decline in their strength, their military strength. He argues that the UK has become way too reliant on the US for their defense.
Hmm.
And he uses this analogy. It's pretty striking. He talks about an anorexic military, like they're unable to really project power on the world stage.
Huh. It's a pretty provocative image.
It is, yeah.
And I guess it reflects his concern about, the UK's ability to actually defend its interests, especially in, like, a world that's getting more and more complex all the time.
Exactly.
And he's critical of what he sees as, the UK's, like, spending priorities.
Yeah.
He's saying they're investing more in things like wind farms
Uh-huh.
than they are in actually, like, strengthening their armed forces.
Right.
So, whether you agree with him or not, I think it raises some important questions about, like, resource allocation and national security.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from personal finance tips to those contrarian investment ideas to some pretty thought-provoking opinions on geopolitics and even like military strategy.
Yeah, it's been a wide-ranging discussion for sure.
So what's the key takeaway you think for our listeners?
I think nutting's his biggest lesson. It's the importance of thinking for yourself.
Okay.
Don't just blindly follow whatever you read in the headlines or accept the conventional wisdom.
Don't be a sheep.
Exactly. Question everything, do your own research, and then, form your own informed opinions.
And that applies to, everything from like managing your own personal finances to understanding like those bigger forces that are shaping the world around us.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Be curious, be skeptical, and be willing to, challenge those assumptions, even your own assumptions.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. And remember, knowledge is power. So the more you understand about, finance and how the markets work, the better equipped you'll be to make those smart decisions and ultimately achieve your financial goals.
Disclaimer. North Breach Limited, Nutstuff trading name, is an appointed representative of Messels Limited, which is authorized and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Nutstuff has made every reasonable effort to ensure the information provided in this communication is correct, but Nutstuff makes no representation nor any warranty as to whether the information is accurate, complete, or up to date. To the extent permitted by law, Nutstuff accepts no responsibility for any errors or misstatements, negligent or otherwise. Nutstuff, its associates, officers, or employees may also have interests in the financial instruments referred to in this information by acting in various roles. The information in this media is confidential. If you are not the intended recipient, you are not authorized to use the information in this media in any way. Nutstuff does not guarantee the integrity of any media or attached files. The view or opinions expressed are the author's own and may not reflect the view or opinions of Nutstuff. Electronic communications carried within the Nutstuff system may be monitored.